Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I've mentioned before the legal adage that self-help is fraught with peril. Self-help is fraught with peril. A law professor told us that back in class many, many years ago. I've always remembered that phrase. And the point is that if you can go to court and get something done, you should probably do it that way than doing it yourself. Now, there are some things you're allowed to do yourself, depending on what your job is. So, for instance, you might be able to go, say, repossess a car if it's collateral on a loan that's in default, and the borrower signed a contract that says that they can, they allow you to do that. But there's always these people who don't want to drag the legal system into something, and they do it on their own, and then, of course, they get dragged into the legal system, and things get ugly. So the police now say that a landlord in Albany tied up and evicted sleeping tenants, dumping them in a cemetery. And this is from the Telegraph.com, a local newspaper. Brendan Lyons wrote the story about a man from Albany who faces kidnapping charges now. And his tenants were bound with zip ties, tape, and had pillowcases over their heads. And again, like I said, they found themselves in a cemetery. And again, presumably this is a landlord-tenant dispute, and courts have landlord-tenant disputes settled in front of them all the time. And so if you are a landlord and you are unhappy with your tenants, I'd suggest you speak to an attorney first before you break out the zip ties. So the landlord's been charged with kidnapping after allegedly tying up two tenants with zip ties and tape, placing pillowcases over their heads, and driving them to a rural cemetery in Columbia County where he dumped them in the snow before dawn on Sunday, according to law enforcement sources and police records. And he did this while he was armed. So that turns out to be against the law. Apparently in New York, I guess that's the thing there. The landlord is 48 years old. He was armed and may have received help from other people, according to police records. So there might be 3 defendants here before we're done. No other arrests have been reported. The alleged kidnapping unfolded between 1 and 8 a.m. on Sunday. The incident began at the multi-unit Grandview Terrace, where the defendant and his 2 tenants have resided in the city's South End. The landlord, who police records indicate has been arrested previously for charges ranging from assault to violating an order of protection, has owned the residence now for about 15 years, according to property records. The tenants were a 21-year-old woman and a 32-year-old man who could not be reached for comment. The landlord had previously grown frustrated because he'd been unable to evict the tenants due to the COVID-19 restrictions. The tenants were both sleeping at the time, and he's accused of attacking and tying them up. The 32-year-old male tenant was allegedly punched and kicked by the landlord and the 2 others who were with him before being tied up. Police reports in the incident do not provide any details on the other suspects. Now, after the man and the woman, who were the tenants, were bound, the landlord allegedly loaded them into what they told police was a Dodge Durango. With the help of the 2 other unidentified suspects, they drove the man and woman to a motel that the victims told police may have been in a nearby town. From there, they were driven to the isolated cemetery in Ghent, a rural town in Columbia County, about 35 miles southeast of Albany. Police reports indicate that the landlord left them tied up in the snow-covered cemetery and drove away. The woman was able to untie herself and walk to a nearby residence to get help. By leaving the pair tied up and abandoning them in the wintry conditions, the landlord, and this is a quote from the police, did expose the victims to a risk of serious physical injury. The landlord was arrested Monday afternoon and arraigned on charges of second-degree kidnapping, being held at the Albany County Jail on Tuesday afternoon on a $50,000 bond. So, this is one of those things where some people are going to respond to this and go, well, the guy's probably frustrated. Yeah, and there's a legal process for this. And you might say, but Steve, he's not allowed to do anything right now because the law says he can't. Oh, okay, well... If you can't take him to court to evict him, you certainly can't kidnap him. That's And what's bizarre is that I've encountered the phrase kidnapping, the idea of kidnapping in several contexts, and many people don't know what kidnapping actually is. And kidnapping at common law is simply moving or holding somebody against their will with the use or threat of force. So I've often told the story about, I wrote a book about the Italian Hall disaster, which took place in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. 73 people died, cry of fire, that was false cry, stampede to get out of a building, and these people died. Well, at the time there was a strike going on, and the head of the union locally They'd called a strike. And the head of the union itself was a guy named Moyer. And Moyer was staying in a nearby hotel. A couple days after the disaster, some people showed up at his hotel room, beat him up, dragged him out of his hotel room and threw him on a train. And the local papers always called that a deportation. The man was deported from our county. And the fact of the matter is that that's also a kidnapping. You can call it anything you want, but moving somebody by force against their will is kidnapping. And a lot of people, probably from watching too much 70s television, I'm dating myself, I know, but you have to understand for the young folk out there that there was a whole genre of movies and television shows where kidnapping was the plot point. And kidnapping was they'd grab somebody and hold them and then call up their relatives and go, pay us money and we'll release them. And so many people assume that kidnapping is that. It's where you take somebody and hold them for ransom or they're hostage for ransom. And that's not required for kidnapping. And so one of the things they do in law school is they'll often put on an exam facts in a little story and ask you to explain every single thing that legally matters about that story. And so, for example, if you were a cashier at a 7-Eleven and a man walked in wearing a ski mask in the middle of summertime and had a baseball bat in his hands, no glove, but a baseball bat, and pointed it over the counter at you and went like this and said, get away from the cash register, and you step back and he reaches over, pops the cash register open, takes the money and runs out. On a law school exam, the question would be discuss. Literally discuss. And you talk about the fact that that's obviously a form of robbery. Baseball bat is a weapon. That's armed robbery. And the fact that the guy went like this at you and said, step back. If you step back, it's kidnapping. It's kidnapping. You were moved against your will with a threat of force. And now I'll admit that that is not the best kidnapping case on earth because that's not as clear cut as the other two crimes are. But the point is that that is, in fact, something that if you didn't mention that in your discussion, you'd get a C on the exam. And that's the point, is that kidnapping is simply moving somebody or holding somebody against their will with the use or threat of force. So here, they obviously used force to move these two people a great distance and, confined them during that and then dumped them someplace. That is kidnapping. That is a classic case of kidnapping. It doesn't matter that there's no ransom called for. Doesn't matter that they let them go at the end. Doesn't matter. Dumping them in the cemetery is an interesting touch that makes the story more interesting. But that, of course, doesn't really add much to this. Just dumping them anywhere is the same. But dumping them where they're exposed to the elements is a problem because you're leaving them in danger. You put them in danger in the first place and you left them in danger. That's the kind of thing that'll probably come back to haunt somebody if, in fact, there's a conviction and if, in fact, there's a sentencing. So it's a crazy, crazy story. But getting back to my original statement, self-help is fraught with peril. And that is that these are difficult times. I've done stories on this. I've mentioned this before, that of all the side effects from COVID, legally, okay, the fact that there are people who are unemployed, they can't pay their rent. There's landlords who can't pay their overhead, but can't evict the people who can't pay their rent. There's banks who want to foreclose on the landlords who can't, and it's this zipper effect, right? All these different things, dominoes falling, whatever analogy you want to use. And so you have some landlords who are very, very fed up by this. But the problem, of course, is that this right here is obviously not the solution. So it's a crazy story. But Brendan Lyons wrote it. David sent it to me. And it's from the Telegraph.com, which I'm guessing is a local newspaper in the Albany area. But according to the police, an Albany landlord tied up evicted sleeping tenants and then dumped them in a cemetery far, far away. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. To be or not to be? That's not really a question.